sure you know, Bardish is the Member of Parliament for Waterloo. That's, I don't know whether that's her most important job, but she's also the government house leader in Ottawa for the Liberals. And you're the first lady government house leader in history. So there you go. Progress is being made. At any rate, Bardish has agreed to come and talk to us today. I've tried to persuade her to talk about separation of church and state, but you may understand that Bardish has a bit of her own mind too, so she may drift off that topic a little bit. Nevertheless, she's also agreed to answer questions. Obviously, if you have questions about separation of church and state, maybe I mentioned that before, we'll be pleased. She'll be pleased to take those. I think she will. Maybe after she gets the question.
Is that why you called me a friend?
Because I've got it's starting to bite a couple. Because I've got a couple of zingers that she may have trouble with. That's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honourable.
Everyone. My most important job currently is the Member of Parliament for the riding of Waterloo. Waterloo region has 5 members of Parliament. So we have Rod Saney in Kitchener Centre, we have Marwan Tabera in Kitchener South Hespeler, Harold Albrecht is the MP in Kitchener-Conestoga, and Brian May, the MP in Cambridge. And for myself, and I have to really say thanks to both Nick and Judd for asking me to come and talk to you this morning. This date was provided to me a long time ago. And it's been interesting because as other things have come up, because we get invited to a lot of events, I've been able to say no, I'm going to see SoFree today and I will not be able to attend. I will be sneaking out a little bit early, so about 11:30, 11:40ish, because there was a loss in my extended family, so I just need to go pay respects before I head to Ottawa. And that's, I think, been the most challenging, is the whole life and death part of the world. When you're an elected official and you're heading to Ottawa when the House is sitting, you're not always able to be in the riding for some of the things that are closer to our heart, and we end up having to pick and choose. But I do want to go pay my respects because these people were instrumental to the individual that I am today. So I do look forward to having a dialogue, a conversation. I know this group has always been respectful. I worked at the Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Centre, and I used to coordinate the festival. And it was a wonderful addition to see your group actually join a booth there so that people could actually receive information on a whole variety of different pieces of information and organizations in the community. So when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that in Canada diversity is our strength, he's not just talking about the shells that we occupy. He's talking about diversity of thought, of perspective, of where we come from, of regions, and the list goes on. So today I would love to know kind of what's on your mind as well. As the elected official, I'll tell you, I believe that government in the past, or we as citizens, have always felt that government should have all the answers. I believe that elected officials are elected by people. Regardless of who votes for you or not, you represent a riding or a province or a country, and you have a job to represent all of them. So when it comes to my office, the MP office that is located at Waterloo City Hall, the riding of Waterloo is the only riding in which the mayor, the member of provincial parliament, and the member of parliament are all in one building. And that's because I believe we should be here to serve our constituents. And I believe that the office should be a non-partisan place because it is paid by the public purse. So when I am introduced as the Liberal member or the Liberal government, I actually believe I represent the government of Canada. So whether you are on the government side or the opposition side, I believe in democracy, everyone has an important role to play. And if we could actually bring ourselves to a space where we're having respectful conversations, where we're not getting personal in those conversations, we'd actually do a better job of growing our country to really be able to compete on the international stage. Today, we are at a spot where the world is looking to Canada and we have heard many times that the world needs more Canada. As a person that's born and raised in this community, I can tell you that Canada needs more Waterloo region. And that's because we come together and we have these conversations. So I would love to hear some of your agenda and what you would like to bring up today. Canwar is the newest addition to the team in the Waterloo office, so we'll be taking some notes. If there's information that we need to get back to you on, that's what we do. We, I believe, are a link between government and your homes and the community to be able to provide you any insight and information you need. If there's a message that you would like sent to a certain elected official, minister of the government, we would also share that, because there's opinions and conversations that are not always taking place, and I think groups like this are having them, and I personally, as the Member of Parliament, want to be part of them, and that's why I was really happy to be invited, and that's why we held it off, and that's why I am here today. So
I'd like to ask what the government is going to do about the Saudi question. Both the question about what's been done with Jamal Khashoggi and also with Raif Badawi.
Yeah.
Because the Raif Badawi thing's been going on for what, 5 years now?
Well, he's been in jail over 6 years.
6 years, so, and there really hasn't been any movement on that.
So
it's even more concerning after the things that have been going, the way they've been treating Canada lately, and the fact that they're so like, well, we're Saudi and screw you. Like, it's not how you act on the world stage, and a lot of us don't understand why we still have a relationship with them.
So I think it's because, and this is the challenging part of being government. I would not actually say it's quite as black and white. So I think many people have chosen to believe that they know the outcome. I always take this back to the family unit. I am a child of immigrants. Oftentimes, whenever something would happen, my mom or my dad or my grandmother or my grandfather would be like, I know why. I know why she does that. I know what's happening, but oftentimes we've not come to the table and had those conversations. So we know that there is serious concerns. We know that there's been agreements signed in the past. We know that there is ways to come out of those agreements, but we also have to respect those agreements. Governments change and things happen. So we did send somebody to go listen to the tapes. So there is an individual within our security agencies that was sent on the public first to listen to them, because we take it seriously. There is kind of like a trial thing happening where we're figuring out what happened. And it's important that, I'll take it back to the family unit. Some of us in the family were a little bit more clever than others. And sometimes people got the blame that weren't the ones who did it. So we just need to know. And I'll tell you, I got in trouble in my family home because somebody wrote on the wall and the paint came off and then they covered it with whiteout. I would never cover it with whiteout. I know where the paint was. I would have covered it with paint. But I got in trouble for that, and it's traumatized me for life. But surely enough, later on in life, we did find out who it was, and that's where we need to make sure we know what took place. And that's why I would say the international community is working together. Certain countries have different positions because they think the economy is the end-all, be-all. The economy is essential, but we can be creative as to how do we grow the economy and protect the environment. We can be creative as to how do we look at what is being created and being able to provide other uses for it. And that's what's happening in Canada. So Minister Freeland has been on the international stage, has been on the news stating this, that we are having these conversations very seriously. As a cabinet minister, I'll tell you, sometimes it's challenging because I have conversations that I can't always share publicly, and I'm not always positive what I can and cannot share because I can't always remember where I had those conversations. But what I can tell you is that those conversations are taking place. What I can tell you is that we're well aware of the relationship in Canada, but with Saudi, but in the past we have put sanctions and we have no problem doing it again. So even when the actions were taken by Saudi to take their ambassador home, cut off all airlines from coming in and out. The students were told to come home. We kind of sat back and we observed because that's their prerogative. But they did let the students finish once they were able to realize what they were talking about. But we also need to visit and think about what kind of relationship are we building? Why are our institutions so committed to wanting to have international students come from one part of the world more than others? Can you put a price on our education? And these are some of the dialogues that are taking place. In Canada, we are a confederation. I'll come right to you. In Canada, we are a confederation. So the federal government has jurisdiction. The provincial government has jurisdiction no differently than the regional and municipal. When it comes to education, it's more on the provincial side, but we are able to converse with most governments.
Yeah, you mentioned, that it's not 100% sure, essentially, that the Saudis did it, but I thought the CIA just released a report saying, yes, 100% that the Saudis did do it.
There's a lot of details to it, though. If you see the speculations that keep coming out.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's actually coming out on the news, but it's a matter, so the conversation's happening, but the storyline does kind of change slightly. And it's changed almost every single day since. This is something I'm following really closely as well, because my community does get impacted by it. But every day there's something exciting. The news, as much as I'm proud that people find it exciting, when I grew up, I used to wear a newspaper. I'd read one newspaper, and I would know what's going on. Today I read like 8 papers in the morning, and I'm still not positive what's happening. And I think that's where we want to make sure that we represent a country on the international stage, and our credibility matters. And the Prime Minister is being looked at, and we are going to do our best to make sure we represent the entire country very well.
So that was my question. Would the CIA evidence or lack of evidence be taken for the actual truth, or would it be?
I don't know that the CIA has, and I'm not getting into, CIA is not a Canadian agency. We are sending our own people to provide us advice. We have confidence in our public service. We have confidence in our security agencies.
Okay.
We need to know what our people, and that's why we sent our people. If we wanted to say, we'll just listen to others, we could, but we need to have confidence within our own, because we have our own international relations and obligations as well. So we want to make sure we're obtaining that information and that they're working closely with ours. And we've developed more of that relationship where the two countries are working closer together, Canada and the US meaning. So we are sharing information better, but we need to be aware of it, so that we are actually, so that there's not like an scapegoat or something, right? Like there's more to it, so we just need to know what's really happening. But I can promise you that there is a lot of resources being consumed to ensure that we are monitoring this very closely. And even with Raif Badawi, and we've made public comments on that, and we've been attacked a little bit for it, but we need to make sure that we do continue to stand up for human rights, not only at home, but in the international communities as well.
Different topic. As typically an NDP supporter, I was disappointed in the platform in the last federal election, and one of the big reasons I voted for you and the Liberals was Justin Trudeau's promise that this would be the last election on the first past the post, which now seems to be...
Isabel, you believe that?
Silly me.
What did you say?
I just said you believe it. I think that
I
was...
think he's
was he
implying
off
that. It's
script?
very naive.
Was he off script when he said that?
The trouble is there's so many politicians that get in with promises, and then it's like, oh, but wait a minute, that's how we got in. So, maybe that's like that. So that seems to have gone by the way. I know BC is having some kind of a referendum on that. There are so many countries, Western countries, that use that system use a proportional representation method very successfully. So,
yeah, I was going to say, in response to that, my understanding is that Justin Trudeau did go across Canada did try to get people engaged, ask for their opinions. And I did do that. This was a few years ago, so my memory's a little bit foggy, but I remember there being some numbers that came out about Canadians that actually responded to his call to do that. And I was shocked at how many, at just the few number of people that actually responded. So I hear, constantly
Well, they don't understand. They don't understand, Isabel, because the people who are pushing for that do not have a clear plan. And
There are different ways of doing
I know
it.
that.
This should be a whole separate meeting.
And the bottom line is Isabel, at this point,
It's not
anybody,
explained well enough.
well,
And
And government should go to every single individual, and they should explain it to every
Isabel,
individual.
I've listened to the very people who are proposing this, Bob Junkman being the major one, and Bob uses numbers like maple syrup. You spread it around, enough of them around.
I took a course at Laurier.
But I'm
There's
sorry.
an excellent video.
I know that,
There are
but we
excellent-
don't want another Israel.
So, okay, which is clear that even in this nice room right here, we don't have consensus. The electoral system, and first of all, I personally will say that as a person who's been an electoral reformer for a long time, I got involved in politics when I was 13 years old. For the record, I'm 38, so I've been involved for longer than I haven't been involved. I've never been in many rooms where people have obtained information, but I've been in many rooms where people feel they should be given that information. Individuals would not be able to do what they do if they did not take that initiative, and that's part of where we are today. People who want information often tend to get and obtain the information they want to hear. And what I'm trying to do as an elected official is get comfortable with being uncomfortable and hearing what I don't want to hear or I can't hear, hence being in places like this. Sometimes the answer seems really black and white. When we're running a country, it's not quite the case, because we really do want to try to advance the country. And what we've noticed for a country like Canada, which is huge land mass wise but not numbers wise, we need to look at why that's not happening. And why is the population all in one space? And why are those people's voices louder than the ones in the north who can't get food in our country? So I think when it comes to priorities, we all have different priorities. For me, electoral reform was one of them. When I made those statements, I made them wholeheartedly. I did. I believed in it. Was I disappointed that when the government of the day gave up a majority on the committee, spent tax dollars to travel across the country, that the unanimous report was submitted to the House of Commons and every party that was involved had a dissenting report to go along with it? Yeah, I was disappointed. But do I think the Prime Minister or the government of the day alone should wear that? Not entirely. Because when we went from coast to coast to coast, less than 500,000 people participated. And when we came out with a tool to use online so that people who weren't part of that conversation were able to be part of it, they were called every single name in the book because it wasn't complicated enough. And why were they involved if they don't already know the systems? We held a town hall here in town, and I encourage people who have tried to be more involved since I've been elected, well, that have always supported me but been involved, and to come. And some of them support first past the post because that's all they understand. And they wanted to learn it, and they were asked to leave a dialogue and a conversation. And so if you look at in Ontario, and I'll bring it right back home. In Ontario, we did try we being the people of Ontario, the government of the day had the Citizens Coalition group set up, which I understand was mostly NDP members, did put forward a referendum question. Yep. And people did not want to add water to their wine because everybody wants their system. People don't want progress. They want their ballot the way they want it, when they want it. And then we're never going to see change. So I think we really have to start looking at what kind of conversation. Looking back, and I've said this a number of times, we did open up the Pandora's box. As government, perhaps we should have had it more limited. Then we would have been attacked from a different... Government's always going to be attacked because that's what we do. But then we would have had a different dialogue, but at least maybe it would have been more not as open. I think because there was such a momentum to want to get rid of first past the post, even we started to buy into everything we were hearing, because though the silent majority was silent and silent, but the people who were loud that wanted to change were loud, and you could hear them. So you figured, if people really want this, we as a human race will figure out a way to get this done. And it just wasn't as much. But I will say to you that electoral reform is more than the ballot. As the government House leader, I've realized that people that are in the House of Commons, if you don't have 12 seats in the federal parliament, you actually don't get equal speaking slots. Well, not even equal, you don't get time. So right now, the government of the day, the Liberals get majority of the time, then the Conservatives get pretty close to the same amount, and then the NDP get a few slots. Miss May, who, whether you appreciate her views or not, is a well-informed woman who works very hard. And she is a member of the opposition, but she doesn't just oppose for the sake of opposing. She will raise points and then vote in the best interest of her constituents and her party members. So we constantly will say that if I will at least tell my team, if she doesn't have a speaking slot, offer her half a slot or share, and we'll ask one of our members, because she adds to it. When there's area issues that are more relevant to perhaps Quebec than the rest of the province, we've even offered, and this, I tell you, takes a piece of my soul away, because I believe in a Canada with 10 provinces and 3 territories. We've even offered the Bloc a spot, because if they need to be heard on a debate, it's important that we hear that, so that when we are advancing it, we'd be able to do it. So we're trying to change the way House of Commons works. When it comes to omnibus legislation, which we had also said we're against the improper use of omnibus, fact, any bill that changes more than one act of a bill or multiple bills is omnibus. So even if something changes 2 different things in 2 different acts, 2 different acts and 2 different bills, by definition, that's omnibus. What we were saying is we were opposed to the improper use of omnibus, because you would have a financial bill with all this like financial measures in it, and then all of a sudden the NEB would be thrown into it, which, and then people were compromised because you voted against the environment when you support the environment, which is hard for the average person to understand. So what we've done is that we changed the standing orders. So now if the speaker notices it's not by themes, good, the speaker is able to change the voting. So the bill's not separated, which I know people would love to see, but this is progress, it's a step. But the speaker can change the votes. So instead of voting one time on all of it, the speaker can say there's going to be 3 votes. And that way you're able to divide it out and do it. So that's a change that took place. Another change that's taken place is the Senate. The Senate, which for a while, the Senate is a sober second thought, the chamber that makes sure legislation is, but that's why it was brought forward. They have beautiful red carpets. It's a great place. They have really intelligent people, I tell you. But for some reason along the lines, and not just one government, this happened over a period of time, they became this partisan body that was kind of doing the work of the political parties, which is unfortunate because all political parties aren't represented there. And so what we've done is we have a more independent and a merit-based appointment process, so Canadians from across the country can apply. So we have a few senators from our region now that have been who have gone forward, and the people who are part of our normal circles that have a political party and go to different political events will say we've never heard of these people before. And it's true, you haven't, because now it's Canadians who feel that they have contributed that would add to that chamber that are being sworn in as senators, rather than people that have been patronage appointments of being like, you've done a great job fundraising for me, I appreciate it, I'm going to stick you in the Senate. No, we've changed that. So the Senate actually on a few, brilliant. Senate on a few occasions actually has amended legislation that the House of Commons was not able to amend, but it was actually in the best interest. And ministers of the day are now actually going to committee and answering questions of senators, because the senators aren't the political stripe that they used to be. And now because the independent senators group, the ISG they refer to it as, is bigger than the conservative group, you have to fight to make sure you get your legislation supported, which I think strengthens democracy. So I get the ballot, but when we do reform, which I think will happen at some point, I hope in my lifetime, we have to make sure it's not just the ballot we're reforming. We also have to reform the standing orders of the House of Commons so that those people actually have a voice in that place, not just a seat.
Thank you, Minister.
Bardish is good.
Going back to the Saudi situation.
Yes.
Am I correct in my knowledge that the previous government made this deal with the Saudis?
Yes. You are correct.
Okay. So we, as a nation, we have a commitment to the Saudis. Is that correct?
Yeah, oh, sure. You can put it like so, yeah.
You've asked
We have a deal with the Saudi. We have an agreement with them.
Okay.
I don't use the word commitment because there is also a commitment that if there is the improper use, we do have an out. So we have there's many commitments in this agreement.
What do you call an improper use?
This is where we have to, this is the challenge. This is the challenge of if it violates human, I don't know the details because some of them that I do know, it's about human rights and so forth. But the way the agreement was signed is that it's probably the most secret thing I've seen since being elected. Like we don't even get the information of it. Because the way it was signed, it's a very, very confidential agreement.
A confidential agreement.
Really secret. Oh, good.
Why is it confidential?
That was the deal that the previous government signed. But you know, I think all of this aside, we are the government of the day. We need to ensure that we are handling the situation and we have a responsibility to do it. That's where the Prime Minister and the government is at. I think when it comes to the campaign, yeah, sure. We will go stripe against stripe and whatever else. I do think between elections, we are the government of the day and we need to take that seriously and we have to figure out what is the solution in this and how do we get there. And that's what we're consuming our efforts on right now.
My personal feeling about this is that as a country, we have made a commitment to the Saudis to supply them with some material.
Yeah.
Right? And I believe regardless of the nature of the government of the day, we should honor that commitment as a nation, as a country. What the Saudis do with that is really none of our business.
And in wait 1 second though. Yeah, he's got the floor. Let him fill it. Yeah.
We know that the United States supplied Nazi Germany with arms, not only before the war but during the war.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line on this?
Exactly there.
I think though that's part of the, so in the campaign, and this is why it shouldn't, this doesn't need to be, this has to be a country about, conversation about Canada, our role at home and on the international stage. And it needs, I think, not be litigated in the public forum, but public deserves to know what's happening. In the campaign, your position was the exact position of every political party. What changed? It's amazing what happens in that House of Commons and where you sit. And that's unfortunate. But in the campaign, the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP, to the point of where a certain NDP member who has jobs in a riding, committed to it, was committed to making sure those jobs stayed, has now clearly stated she's not running and now we should get rid of the contract. That's not how this works. And I think that's where, the position you're stating was the one in the campaign. We have to make sure though, as we are a country that fights for human rights at home as well as on the international stage, that's why we're trying to make sure that we're doing right by our relationship with Indigenous peoples. We've had violations in our own country. We continue to do this. And we need to correct it, but we also need to stand firm on what our expectations are on the international stage, and that's why a little bit of effort should be put into finding out, are they in compliance with this agreement or not, and that's where we're at.
I recognize that the government sitting in Ottawa right now, or any government, first of all needs votes to stay in power, to stay sitting where they are. And they are then influenced by what they perceive to be the feelings of the people.
Why I waver is because so as I said to you, I've been involved in politics for a really long time. We do have a prime minister today that I think some people don't always know how to take, because for him and our team, and why I'm proud to be part of it and why I've chosen to run again, is because we're really trying to lay a foundation in the country that continues to advance regardless of the government of the day. In Canada, every single time we advance, we elect a new government and then we undo. That's not going to help our country compete at home or on the international stage. So these conversations that we're having, no differently than putting a price on carbon pollution, no differently than saying we will not be able to move forward with our commitment to electoral reform. These commitments and the way we're progressing actually isn't about votes and making sure we get re-elected, which does concern me because I really do think we're on a good path that's advancing the country. What we're trying to do is actually do what the responsibility the government has of the day, and that's how we're progressing. But yes, if it's about getting votes, it would have been easy to make a statement and go do, but that's not how we're progressing. We have commitments, we have agreements, we have to make sure that we are, that we also continue to advance our credibility. So it's not quite like it used to be. And I'll tell you this, why I can say this. There's people at the cabinet table that have been at cabinet tables in the past. So they know how cabinet works, they know how government works. And they will say to you, they've never seen a government work like this. We have been at the cabinet table debating. And people will think walking in that we know what's going to happen. This Prime Minister genuinely lets you debate and participate. And we change our mind and do what's in the best interest of Canadians. It's fascinating. So even when the refugees came to Canada and we were supposed to have them in by the end of the year, we ended up bringing in more refugees by the end of February. For the public, it's considered a broken promise. For us, it was the right thing to do, and that's okay if it is. And I think that's where it's just, we're trying to do it differently.
Yes.
It's also first term. Things could change still, but it's early days.
You're going to be in power for about 16 years, right?
Yeah.
I don't see, and I'll tell you what's interesting about the Prime Minister. I'm going to come to you right next. What's interesting about the Prime Minister is that it's not about him. He's actually empowered ministers to do the work, and he actually speaks to members of Parliament. So, and that's what you've heard Lloyd Longfield, you've heard many say, like areas that they know well from their past careers or because of the riding. The Prime Minister will pull you aside, or he will call you up and say, like, okay, what's the story here? It's the most fascinating thing. But he builds us to almost be leaders. So I don't think he plans to be there forever. I think he wants to build strong leaders that also could run the party one day, could go and continue doing great things. As the House leader, okay, first of all, no one's ever picked a woman. So House leaders on the opposition side have happened as women. No one's ever picked a woman to be the House leader on the government side, but he was able to do that. He also picked a person who's first time elected. So even though I've been in those hallways and I've worked on Parliament Hill and I've done it and I know the rules and I love finding a way through the rules, and he knows that about me, he still took a chance on me. But when we're in the House, and if I say this is what's going to happen, he'll be like, sometimes he'll ask, are you sure? And I'll say yes. Sometimes he'll say, why is it going to be like this? I'll explain it. And that's what we do. There's not this guy coming and be like, this is how we're going to do it. Let's go. Right? Like even if you look at this Canada Post issue right now and the fact that we're introducing legislation, my team and I have been involved in what's the best way to do this. Do we disrupt everyone while they're in their constituencies? How do we figure out a good way to do this? Can we get them to stay at the table? And the Minister of Labour directly involved making sure that we're encouraging them to figure out a way to move forward so we don't have to intervene. Because it would be good if people could have those adult conversations. But when they can't, then government has a responsibility. So he does government very differently. When he said that it was my father who started the centralization of the Prime Minister's office, and it's going to be me who starts the decentralization of the Prime Minister's office, he meant it. Because some days we really wish you could just call that office across the street and say, what are we going to do? But we get to figure it out. And we work together to get there. So he runs it very differently, which is quite refreshing, but challenging at times. Yes, Nick?
How did Kirsten Freeland do with our friends south of the border on the NAFTA deal? Did we come out okay, and what's your feelings about that?
I think, okay, so first of all, Chrystia Freeland did a great job. The Prime Minister had full confidence in her. She has an amazing team of negotiators. Our public service in Canada is number one. Our negotiators work tremendously hard and are very, very good at doing their jobs. I think what was really smart and wise was the Team Canada approach, and the fact that Chrystia Freeland had people from across the country of all different political stripes and non-stripes come together to fight for Canada. I think what was also smart was that we had said from the beginning that we're willing to modernize and we will not leave the table. So I think people knew where we stood, and it was really good that all MPs and ministers and premiers and MLAs were actually going and speaking to the states and the communities that they work well with to actually build an approach so that people understood what NAFTA meant. Because I think, back to the earlier point, most people don't really know what that deal means. And Canada and the US work so closely together. Our economies are so intertwined, our supply chains are so intertwined that people don't even realize when you're buying Canadian, you're buying American, and when you're buying American, you're buying Canadian. It's just the way it is. So when it comes to the NAFTA deal, we did lose 3.6% of the market when it comes to supply management. So our dairy farmers are a little upset, but it's 3.6%. We have to remember, at the beginning of this, south of the border, the president had said that we will dismantle supply management. It will not exist. So at the deal we've gotten and where we are, supply management is fully intact, and it is there for our farmers and our producers. So I would say it's a win. Our cultural industries, so we were able to protect our cultural industries, so Canadian content remains Canadian content. When the deal was created 20 years ago, there was no online world. Within the current NAFTA, we have not only Canadian content as per the traditional definition, but all our online content is also remains ours. So I think that's a win. When it comes to certain areas, okay, so the NAFTA deal and the USMCA, basically the same, with about 3.6% of the market gone for supply management, online cultural content brought in, and what else is, auto. We had a really good win for auto. So now when cars are made, they have to have majority of the car made with quesadillas, with well-paid labor. So that actually helps Canada and the US over Mexico. So that was a really big win. So that's where Jerry Dias and the union had said, this is something we've been fighting for like decades, and we got it. So that was good. The USMCA, the NAFTA 2.0, also has an environment chapter. No one speaks about it, but it's true. And when it came to the whole concept about, what do they say? Virtue signaling. That the Liberals, they care about women and Indigenous and whatever. We do. We think all people should have a chance at succeeding, regardless of what you might affiliate with or whatever else. And it's no different than communities such as this. So that's actually in there. Within the preamble, there is verbiage that recognizes the importance of it. But there's a chapter devoted to the environment, which is cool. Because we really do need to protect the environment, and we really do need to be more aware of the decisions we're making. So I would say the USMCA, the NAFTA 2.0, is a really good deal for Canada. It's unfortunate that it's not as, we could have gone a lot further because of the economy today, but we surely didn't go back, which I think is exactly what we needed. And I should also say the sunset clause. So basically what would happen, and this is, people say your sovereignty, I should talk about this real quickly. We can still deal with any country we want to deal with. Before the USMCA, any country, so the United States or Mexico, could leave and be not part of NAFTA anymore. They would have to give their notice and they could do it. Now, basically, their reason would be that because you're dealing with this country, we don't want to be here. So they're kind of giving a reason, but you still have to give that period of time. And most countries in the world that we're working with we have to look at, is it one big giant trade deal you'd be signing, or are you kind of into those economies? Because we're already working with most of these economies, we just don't have written deals. And that's why the Prime Minister has been out quite vocally this week and last week, stating that we want to sign deals, we want to make economies work for more than our country.
In terms of the economic deals, are we getting more traction with the individual states than we are with the U.S. federal government?
I think I think the approach that we took from the beginning was to put it into people's backyards. So even when the tariffs were hit, if you notice our tariffs, which I thought we did a pretty good job, it was in people's backyards, right? So like Jack Daniels, like you knew who that was hitting. Pickles, you knew who that was hitting. Yeah. And then when they kind of livened up to say, oh, this is our jobs, and we were like, you need to work with your government. Right? Like, and that was it. One, yes.
I just want to follow up on the trade. So I read recently that we are not taking full advantage of the deal with European Union. So everybody was so focused on the USMCA, and then we have let all the Europeans come in and to the disproportionate amount.
The CETA, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So CETA was just signed. It's very new, but we are doing what we're trying to do is make sure people know how to use that. So what businesses is it a clear fit for? But we also don't want to. CETA is the first deal, I'm really proud, that has a chapter for small business. Because the way our businesses and our economy will grow is through small businesses, through innovation and trade. So it's actually a really good deal for them. CETA also lets the supply management community had a challenge with it because they get, I think, 3.75, whatever, it's around the same percentage access. But it is CETA, the numbers I'm seeing would say that we are increasing our trade with Europe, but just not at the amount we should have. But you're absolutely correct that there was a lot of resources put into the USMCA, the NAFTA negotiations, so therefore it did distract from others. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue. NAFTA is a little bit of a different beast, and this goes back into every conversation we're having. We really do need to start thinking about why do we put ourselves against the wall like that, right? So NAFTA is the major deal that we work with. The US is our #1 market for almost everything. We're their #1 supplier for almost everything. And do we want to diversify, or do we want our eggs in one basket? And this is a challenging adult conversation we're trying to have, which is why we say it's not about a political stripe. This is about what's going to take Canada moving forward. And that's why with Minister Freeland and now with Minister Carr, we don't say it's our government that did it. We say Canadians did it because we need it to belong so that we can continue growing. But CETA, I think you'll see more traction happening with it. You'll see more trade missions heading that way, but the traditional trade missions don't always benefit either. So I did a tourism trade mission when I was a tourism minister, but what we did was, it was like a dating kind of circle. So we took your business, we knew what you were looking for, and then we had our contacts in, like China was the example, connecting you to 5 people so that when you had your meetings, they were actually going to result in deals and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't your first point of contact when you got there. We initiated those conversations before so that you could actually sign and progress. And I think with CETA, we'll do similarly. And we also have the CPTPP, right? So.
Thanks for coming, Bardish.
Thank you for having me.
I'm a grade 7 and 8 immersion teacher at a school a few blocks from here. I teach history.
Very good.
I'm teaching history for about 10 years.
Where do you teach it?
It's McGregor.
I went to McGregor. I'll come visit if you want me to come.
Well, actually, I would. We'll talk about that. Okay. I'll just get your contact info before you go. Thank you. But one other thing is, you know, as I teach grade 7's history, we talk about the role of women in the 1700s versus today. And I put up a photo of Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet. We point out that 50% of the people there are women and are constantly strengthening, you know, young women strengthen themselves, are strengthening the appreciation of the role of women in our society. Perhaps it's now getting to where it can be. So here's 2 questions for you. I would love to go back to my history classes and say, I was listening to Bardish talk, and this is what she said. In your experience, what are some of the real wins of having 50% of the cabinet members being women? What are the real wins? Can you name one or two? And are there any challenges or things that need to continue to be worked out?
Within our Budget Implementation Act 2, we just advanced pay equity legislation. The fact is that in our country, women are still being paid 88 cents on the dollar. So we have a lot of work to do. Today on the news, they were talking about, it's within our subconscious, or it's almost ingrained with us to see what the role of women is versus the role of men. And we just need to do a better job at changing that. I think you're absolutely correct. With the Prime Minister choosing gender parity at the cabinet table was transformational. I'll tell you, he received a lot more respect on the international stage than he did at home. The correspondence and the messages we got were disheartening at best. If I was not from the region I am, where so many people around me have allowed me to be the individual that I am, I'm not sure that I would have the courage to keep fighting. But I come, and that's why I say, as much as the world needs more Canada, Canada needs more Waterloo region, because I know how good the people here have been to me. And when somebody does send a message that is inappropriate at best, there's always other people that will say, no, not here. And I admire that. And I think that's what the Prime Minister basically did. The benefits of having gender parity at the cabinet table includes the benefits of having people who are not doctors and lawyers only at the cabinet table. Is when we are actually debating legislation and conversing about it, the perspectives that come are so different. When you have people, so I'm the child of immigrants and I can always share that. I'm a woman in science, I can always share that. I'm seen as a young woman, I can share that. I am a visible minority, I can share that. So there's things that I can share that other people cannot share. You have colleagues around the table who came to Canada as a refugee, and they can share what it means to have lived that and what that legislation would mean for them. Plus, we work really closely with our constituents, and that's why the Prime Minister will say, don't ever get bogged down in the Ottawa bubble. You represent, first and foremost, your constituents. Not only the people who voted for you, but the people who live in your riding, and you have to stay connected to them. And that's why we try to say stories. But so when you have a person who ran a homeless shelter talking about the national housing strategy, all of a sudden it's about lives and it's about people. And that's what it is. It used to be that every conversation was about dollars and cents, which is important. And we need to always remember that the economy is important, because love will not pay your bills. And when you don't have your job and you can't turn on your lights, it's not going to be good, and you're probably not going to continue getting support. But hope matters to people. In the world we live in today, hope has value. And by being able to share those voices and making sure that when we are building a national housing strategy for people that we know are part of it, we're all of a sudden also considering the people who weren't considered originally. But if we can think about them too when we're making decisions, we could be further ahead. And I'll relate this to infrastructure in our community. Whenever we changed, the single lane to 2 lanes because there's too much traffic. Then we take the 2 lanes and we made it get a single lane. And then a year later we realized, oh, we should have put a bike lane in there. And then you put in the bike lane. Then you realize the bike lane's too close to the road, so we should have put a boulevard in between. So we just keep doing this, which you're kind of like, why? So with having the diversity of perspectives around the table, we take a little bit more time to get there, but I think we get there in better shape because we've thought it through a lot better. And I think we should have done that with roundabouts here. If you go to Europe, like in Europe, the person crossing is not in the middle of the roundabout.
Yeah, exactly.
The person's like 20 feet back. And here it's like in the middle of the...
It's not.
I don't get it. But so I just think we try to actually look at the international stage, and we did this with cannabis. People were really worried about cannabis legalization. October 17th it happened. The world continues to turn. It's a beautiful place. I've seen the sunshine, but that was because we looked at places in the US, we looked at places in Europe, we looked at what they did well. They advised us as to things not to do, hence edibles, just take a little bit of time, whatever. So we learned from them, which allows us to roll out a better process. But there's a lot more level heads around the table because all of a sudden you have to be a lot more respectful, right? So you don't know what you don't know, and so it's made a huge change. But if I can come visit, I can, and I can do it in French too. Un petit peu. Je dois pratiquer, mais oui, je comprends bien.
Quick, Bardish has to go, but I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, which I'm just going to let you table and answer, because I'm pretty sure this is going to blindside you, which you don't want to do.
Like, who invites somebody over and then says, I want to blindside you?
It never happened to you, I know.
But at least you were forewarned.
That's it, with witnesses.
So, yeah. Criminal Code of Canada,
Yes.
Section 319, 3B.
Okay.
You're fully aware of that?
No.
You're not. And I don't expect you to be. I was in Ottawa, and I'll do this very quickly, at a meeting with the advisors to the Minister of Justice.
Yeah.
And her head advisor had no idea what it was. They knew about 296, which of course is on the way out of the Senate, that's off his job.
Yeah.
But
What is
319 deals with hate speech and hate literature.
Okay, yes.
319 section 2 says that if you write hate literature or you utter hate speech against specific individuals or specific groups, you go to jail.
Yes.
Basically, I can't remember what term it is. But 3B says you're exempt from that if you support your argument from your holy writings.
From your holy writings. Yeah, great.
Your holy scripture.
Kill the infidel.
So in other words, for example, a fundamentalist Christian can condemn Jews for killing Jesus and discriminate against them and utter what is essentially hate speech or write hate literature with impunity, because that's in the Gospels. So, or at least I can quote the Gospel. So, my question, of course, that I'm going to allow you to table is, where does that sit? Those kinds of things sit on the government, on government issues, and I know where.
Has that been tried in court?
Not yet.
No, it hasn't been yet, but it's there.
And
It shouldn't
I
be.
think what worries me.
There's so much in there that's never been actually challenged.
What worries me is we have a climate here with people like Dunford who are bigoted and just racist and all of that. And I can see somebody out there who finds that statute and wants to use it. For instance, I am a parent to a transgender woman, and I am terrified that someday she's going to go to a bathroom and get beaten up.
And that's a legitimate on-the-ground concern.
How old?
28.
Very good.
But she's terrified to use public washroom.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation, but we're having it.
But I can see some jerk who uses that to justify beating her up.
Yeah.
And it's whether it's gone to court or not, it sets the tone. And if they know that, and they do know that. The other thing is, along the same line, every morning our children and our grandchildren go to school, and one of the fundamental rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Supreme Court has said, is the right to freedom from religion. Right? The court in 1984 they said that, and they've reiterated it several times since. But every morning our children have religion forced upon them.
Where?
In high school, in all the schools.
What school?
Because they play the national anthem.
Oh,
The PA system.
that's loaded.
That's a theistic national anthem. Now by the way, and I'm president of SCS, we've already written all the school boards in Ontario and said, we're asking for an accommodation. Play instrumental versions only. And if you're going to ask children to memorize the national anthem, let them memorize our non-theistic version. Now the problem, I understand your legislative problem. You're not, because
yeah.
I don't know how many atheist members of parliament there are. I've heard of one.
Who?
I don't know. And that gives you a sense of the tone, right? We're the invisible minority. And people want to keep us that way.
I don't think people want to keep you that way.
No,
I wouldn't be here if that was
they
true.
Don't know about it.
Yeah.
No, you're an exception.
Some do.
Yeah, some do. My point is that obviously this is something we're going to have to take through the courts. Because I don't think, for some reason changing the words of the national anthem is some kind of holy grail.
Well, we did change them. We went.
You saw the trouble it caused.
My word.
And the thing is, if you look at the history of
But
Canada.
it changed when I was a kid.
I know.
I know.
They have the history of
How we forget.
of the national anthem. It's all been a propaganda exercise. It's not a sincere document at all from the get-go. And when Pierre Trudeau put God into the English version, that was a clear ride over. So my point is this, that there are a number of things that it's very difficult for you to get a handle on because they're in the background. So those are the kinds of things that we are starting to say, hey, we need to talk to politicians about this. And I've asked people here.
I'd rather be referred to as an elected official over a politician.
I know that.
Okay.
I'm sure you would. I've asked everyone here to go join a political party. I don't care which one.
Or start your own.
But go there and raise these questions at the grassroots level.
So I'm gonna take that off. I'll take that offline, and I'll make sure I get back to you in writing. Kenra has the information. I just want to say, first of all, when it comes to any changes, whether it's to the justice system or the laws that go with it, or to the national anthem, seem to be challenging because people are afraid of change. But things are constantly changing. And I'll tell you, as the elected official, constantly people will say, like, we need things done differently, but they don't want to change anything. They'll be like, we need change, but don't do anything differently.
It's like when people say, well, it's okay if you don't believe in God, but don't be an atheist. We get that a lot. Yeah.
And I think, but this is like, and I do believe that when children are born into our world, they are born so free and so pure and full of love. I think what we turn them into is what we teach them. So we don't, it was like that, I think it was like a year or two ago, and they had those two kids that were in kindergarten, and they had their matching outfits on, and the kids were like, we're gonna get haircuts and the teacher's not gonna be able to tell us apart.
Yeah.
And they thought like they were so like we're gonna be twins because they felt they were so the same because they liked the same things, they acted the same. And you got this black kid and this white kid. But they figured if we get these matching haircuts, the teacher's gonna be so confused. Like, and they were so positive.
My boy was like, I'm gonna go get my hair cut like my friend, and they'll totally not know who I am.
Like so, and that's where. So I think that we often do teach these. So we've tried to actually make some changes within the criminal code. I'm sure you've heard a little bit about it, and people are very defensive to it. And that's why I asked, has it ever been challenged? Because a lot of the stuff that's in there has never even been challenged or used.
By the way, with 296 is when we write, for example, if I write to the High Commissioner for Bangladesh, what I have got back is, well, yeah, but this is the same blasphemy law that 296 is the blasphemy, anti-blasphemy libel law. This is the same law that you have in Canada. Well, it is, but you added a few things, like if you blasphemy is saying something that you're not Muslim.
So Cameron, the office that we've expanded when it comes to the Office of Religious Freedoms, I wonder if this would be actually under it. Because it is religious freedoms, which I had a challenge of, because I was like, why does it have to be religious freedoms? Why isn't it just of freedoms? So we can ask if where it would fall under. This would be under Canadian heritage when it comes to the national anthem, so we at least can get some context of having that conversation. And the criminal code will be the Minister of Justice, but not only the Minister of Justice, because I would bring in the Minister of Multiculturalism and I would bring in a couple others, and taking a whole of government approach does not allow, make sure that the decision is not left with one individual, so that we can. Yeah.
Real pet peeve of mine. Yeah.
You've been waiting. We could have met up earlier, you know.
When they have a committee meeting, Secular Connection Séculière has asked on a number of occasions, for example, the Joint Committee on Assisted Dying, to be there, to be a witness. And we are told by the clerk of those committees, no, the members of the committee choose.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Why won't they choose you?
And so 4 religious organizations were heard from directly, and a number of other people. We were refused, and we submitted, but we made a submission written, but who knows whether they read it or not. There was a committee.
Who's the chair?
I can't remember now. That committee's not there anymore. But the Heritage Committee of the the committee for the Canadian for the Ministry of Canadian Heritage had a meeting on systemic discrimination, systemic religious and racial discrimination. We applied, we're told by the clerk, no, they choose their own people. who they want.
They do, but what?
They do. They heard from 20 religious people.
Yeah.
We heard from one atheist, and he was limited to talking about the definition of Islamophobia.
Oh, that was Ali Rizvi.
Yeah, Ali Rizvi. But the thing is that my point is that I understand that's the system, and we're trying to work with that system. SCS is trying to work with that system, but I'm wondering if there's not a way to say, okay, you have to entertain people that you don't invite, because
no, but
obviously they're going to invite. Most people on those committees are religious people, so they've got the religious connection.
But they represent people who are not, don't necessarily affiliate the same way. So therefore, they do have a responsibility. This is why I love what I do. But you have to talk to me beforehand, because I would know who it's on it. And sometimes I've got favors. I'll cash them in. I happen to know the house leader too, so. That's not the appropriate way to succeed, but sometimes, until the rules change, we got to follow the current ones.
Okay. Obviously, we need to do something.
But if you let me know in future for committees, if you know who the members are or whatever else, or who the chair is, we can have those. But the chairs that we have currently, whether on the government side or opposition side, actually are really good at reading any additional materials that come to them. And I've heard that within debates and so forth, but I would love to work with you to make that happen. Yeah. Cool? Thank you.
Good morning.
Anytime.